Of all the confounding results in this past election, perhaps the strangest phenomenon was the surprising number of people who voted for Democrats down ballot and then checked off Donald Trump for president. That was the case in New York's 14th district. A number of voters cast their ballot for both Trump and one of the House's most progressive Democrats, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, better known as AOC. And while the Democratic Party is still reeling from the results, Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is doing something a lot of the D.C. folks aren't doing, which is talking to social media and actually talking to voters to figure out why this happened.
If you voted for Donald Trump and me, or if you voted for Donald Trump and voted Democratic down ballot, I would really love to hear from you. This is not a place of judgment. I'm not gonna put your stuff on blast or anything like that or dunk on it. That's genuinely not the intent here. I actually want to learn from you. I want to hear what you were thinking, and I just want to hear from you.
Joining me now is the aforementioned Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. Okay, AOC, what'd they say?
I mean, there's a lot of different things that we saw. I think there's a lot of people. First of all, it's important to note that Democrats, oftentimes when we lose elections, we think that we lost people to Trump. And that is true in circumstances, but they don't look enough at the fact that we also lost people to the couch. Mm-hmm. We have two people that we're running against. So a lot of people say, this is why I voted for you and Trump. And some people say this is why I didn't vote or didn't vote top of the ticket.
Right. Skip the top of the ticket, which, by the way, there's been a lot of paranoia about the fact that Democrats were able to win statewide in some places while Kamala Harris lost. And I keep trying to tell people there are voters who go in and either just vote the top, Trump voters who will say, I just want Trump and don't care about Republicans, and the reverse, who say, I'm not voting top of the ticket, but I'll vote everybody else.
Right, right. And I think we saw some of that happen as well. But when it comes to people who split their ticket, I think a lot of people cited several different things. One is there is universal frustration in this country. Much of it, I actually think, justified, that is raging at a political establishment that centers corporate interests, billionaires, and puts their needs ahead of the needs of working Americans. And we know that we can either channel this righteous rage, because there are people whose SNAP was cut off, their child tax credits were cut off, but they're seeing people like Elon Musk getting tax breaks and kissing up to Donald Trump in order to do so.
But they vote for, then why vote for Elon Musk and Donald Trump?
And I think that, of course, is the question.
It makes no sense.
And I think part of it has to do with the fact that, and I think we're still in a process of going through the data. It's important to say that.
Yes.
And I actually think that it's important to say that the people who are rushing to say, let me give you my grand theory of what's going on right now.
The problem is you went too woke. Sorry, Kamala Harris was running with Liz Cheney at her side. She wasn't going, quote unquote, woke.
If we had an election on November 5th and November 6th, you've got an answer.
Right.
Don't listen to those people.
I agreed.
Do not listen to those people.
Co-signed.
So I want to say that we should all have the humility of saying this is an ongoing learning process. However, there is something to be said about it doesn't matter that he's lying. He's saying that I'm fighting for you. In all of this debate that people are talking about with this woke thing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. It's because we care about trans people, and that's why.
And by the way, only Donald Trump cared about trans people,
right,
because he was the one running $130 million worth of ads. The Harris campaign said nothing about this issue.
That's right. That's right. And listen, the ads, it's not to even deny the fact that these ads were effective in certain areas. What I think people are paying too much attention to is the first half of that ad, which says Kamala Harris is, or that said, Kamala Harris is for they, them. Everyone's focusing on that. They're not focusing on the second half of that ad, where he said, Donald Trump is for you.
Yeah, yeah.
And Democrats very often, in their messaging, they speak in terms and in concepts and not in the second person. I care about you. And political races are not about one candidate versus another candidate. Too often it gets pigeonholed like that. It is a race to convince a person about who cares about you more.
Let me ask you this question, because we've been talking a lot about RFK Jr. My mind is a bit blown. I mean, we knew that Donald Trump would go wild. There's no constraints on him. He could just put all his friends in. But we're talking about RFK Jr. and the possibility of people pulling back on measles vaccines, on another pandemic happening. You're talking about Matt Gaetz. There's a 17-year-old girl out there terrified that all of her records, all of the witnesses against him in this case where she was trafficked, could be in the hands of Matt Gaetz, and he could be the most powerful law enforcement official in the country in a case where the president of the United States is an adjudicated sexual abuser. If you're a sexual assault survivor, you're thinking, oh my God, this country 100%. Is out to get me. They're out to get me and force me to have children by sexual assault. So the message to women has been insane, okay? And the people he's nominating are TV hosts, et cetera. Do you think the people who voted for him that you've talked to were expecting this?
No. No.
Or true mass deportation.
Genuinely,
yeah.
No. And it's heartbreaking, actually. It is heartbreaking. And people may want to take like a kind of vengeful stance about this, but it is genuinely heartbreaking. People need to understand that there are people, millions of people in this country, and I was one of them, where you are working 2-3 shifts a day to try to make ends meet. You're not reading the newspaper every morning with a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
You're not. And it's not to say that people are uneducated or uninformed or anything like that. But like, this is real life. Yeah. This is real life. You got a baby on your hip and you've got 2-3 shifts to work in that day and you're just trying to make things work, and you have such an overwhelm of information. And I actually think something that is different about this moment than I saw, whether it was 2020 or after 2016, is that almost like right the day after, people immediately said, were coming to me and saying, he's not actually going to do that, right? And it's important to say, people may often say, he said he was going to do this. It was right here on the campaign trail. If you actually listen to him, if you listen to Donald Trump's acceptance speech, when he talked about immigration, he talked about legal pathways first.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't say
he didn't lead with mass deportation.
Absolutely.
NBC's Julie Sirkin is reporting on Capitol Hill. Also with us, Mariana Sotomayor, congressional reporter for The Washington Post. And Michael Hardaway is here in studio with me, former communications director and spokesman for Congressman Hakeem Jeffries and former staffer for Senator Dick Durbin. Welcome to all of you. So, Julie, what do we know about the House's investigation into Matt Gaetz?
Well, we know, Chris, that it has been ongoing for multiple years. That committee is very elusive. It operates like a black hole. And we also know that in September of this year, Matt Gaetz announced publicly to us and also in a letter to the committee that he is done voluntarily cooperating with the panel's investigation. He said what they're asking of him, for example, how many sexual partners he's had who are adults over the last 7 years, is, quote, none of the committee's business. Of course, Gaetz has been the subject of a sprawling DOJ investigation. Ultimately, he did not get charged in that. The ethics panel, as you noted, meeting today, at least the investigative subcommittee, to decide whether they will release this report. Once Gaetz handed in his resignation, though, that was effective at 12 noon today, then this investigation presumably could just go away. But sources tell my colleague Scott Wong, for example, that it's not against precedent, that the committee has, in fact, before released a committee report on whoever they've been investigating of people who have left Congress, who have resigned. And I suspect this pressure that we've been hearing about all day long from senators on both sides of the aisle to get the investigation, to get the facts in their hands so that they can be informed when they are processing Matt Gaetz' confirmation to be the head of the Department of Justice. That is a requirement, not an option. I just talked to Senator Kevin Cramer, for example, who was unequivocal in saying that this is actually a waste of political capital for Trump and Republicans, that he presumes that there are more than 5 to 10 Republicans who right now at this moment would vote against Gaetz. He even said he's not sure how he's going to vote, but certainly he's not happy with the guy, including the fact that he said that Gaetz destroyed the House when he ousted Kevin McCarthy. So a lot of bad blood for Gaetz here. And we've reported as well, of course, that Gaetz and J.D. Vance's team are making calls around the Senate to get a temperature check on his nomination.
Yeah, Mariana, I think it is fair to say that Matt Gaetz is not the most popular member of Congress on the Hill. But let me ask you about what you're hearing on the ground, the real options that there are. I mean, obviously, this is a very closed committee. They're not likely to come out and all talk in front of cameras. But what are the chances we find out what's in this report?
That's correct. This committee is incredibly tight-lipped, but I did want to note I have 2 sources familiar who now say that the committee will be meeting tomorrow on Friday, and that is when they will consider voting on this report. The report could also be publicly released as quickly as Friday. And of course, we have been hearing from a number of senators, both Democrats and Republicans, who very much want this report to be released or at least turned over to the Senate Judiciary Committee so that lawmakers can prepare for whenever Gaetz is before the committee for that hearing. They can read over this report, know that information, and question him on it. I am actually on the House side of the Capitol, where many House Republicans have been very vocal about just how much they dislike Matt Gaetz, what he has done to the institution as a whole, and their complete disbelief that Trump, as much as many of these Republicans admire Trump and are looking at who he's appointing to his cabinet, they really cannot believe that Trump himself is going to appoint Gaetz as Attorney General. Markwayne Mullin, senator, former House member, even joked earlier today that he had to Google whether Gaetz even is a lawyer, which fact checked he is. He does have a law degree.
Yeah, he has not practiced extensively the law, but he does have a law degree. OK, Michael, take us inside these kinds of rooms. First of all, wouldn't you like to be a fly on the wall? I know I would. But how do you even approach a decision like this? First of all, he's resigned from Congress now. It would be a different kind of conversation, presumably, if he was still a member of the House. But, and a pretty big but, he is the president-elect's choice for a very important position.
Yeah, I think his biggest problem is he doesn't really have any allies on either side. Obviously, on the Democratic side, there would be concerns in terms of what's in the report and whether he's qualified. But on the Republican side, even, a lot of people seem to hate this guy. And so that is incredibly problematic tomorrow as they have this conversation about what's going to happen with the report, because I think there are many people on the Republican side that have a bone to pick with him.
Are there rules or I guess at least traditions that guide these kinds of conversations?
Traditions are out the window right now. And the reality is that especially on divisive committees like Judiciary, that doesn't really exist in this era, which is his other problem. Again, you have many people that have a bone to pick with you. And so I think that is problematic. I don't really understand why Trump would expend this level of political capital this early on a guy like this, but it would be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, Mariana, we know that Trump really does prize and often reward loyalty, but we also know he likes praise for whatever he does. So I wonder, wanting approval outweigh any loyalty to Gaetz, who has been a fierce ally, or could Trump sour on Gaetz as he grows more, people grow more critical as there's more backlash?
It's entirely possible. There are many Republicans on Capitol Hill who are hoping that Trump does sour on this pick. I think one thing to note, especially as we're all waiting for House ethics, is Trump obviously is not just exerting pressure on a number of Republicans here, but it is possible that he will continue to exert pressure on Speaker Mike Johnson. Johnson has told reporters that he is not involved in any way with any House ethics investigation. There is a clear line and of respect, I should say, to make sure that the speaker does not get involved, does not direct these members as to what to do. And that's pretty critical here, because there has not been precedent in the past for a Speaker of the House. As much as maybe Trump may try and pressure the speaker, a speaker has never gone to these members to say, don't do this. That if Johnson were to do that, though he has said he is not going to, that would be incredibly consequential and just, again, show just how much influence Trump has.
But it's interesting, isn't it, Mariana? We keep talking about how this Matt Gaetz pick is going to put pressure on the Senate side. But on the House side, as you point out, there is a different kind of pressure, but could be pressure nevertheless, right?
Of course. And listen, this is just the first test of many, right? Because when Republicans officially have the White House, the House, and the Senate next year, many Republicans I have talked to are privately bracing for that pressure campaign that's going to come from Trump, whether it's in the form of policy, whether it's in the form of trying to reform different parts of the government. Of course, Republicans are on board with Trump's agenda. They're very excited that they have all levers of power to pass this conservative policies that they've been talking about for some time. But the devil's going to be in the details. And that pressure they know is coming from the White House at a certain point.
So, Michael, you've got Matt Gaetz, you've got Michael Waltz and Elise Stefanik, right? All have been tapped for roles in the upcoming Trump administration. So Speaker Johnson goes in, at least down 3, right, at least temporarily. And I want to play what he had to say about this yesterday.
The Republican conference is full of talented people who are extraordinary leaders and have great expertise, and everyone in this Congress, in this conference, could serve in a leadership position in the administration. But I have begged and pleaded with the new president, enough already. Okay, but because our numbers are small.
There are still some outstanding decisions to be made, or, you know, calls to be made, House seats that have not been filled. Having said that, what's a likely period of time where he could be, where Speaker Johnson could be missing 3 people, and how consequential could that be?
Well, this is great news for Democrats in that, you know, I thought it was always going to be close in terms of the Republican majority, but it becomes even slimmer with every passing day where you have a new Republican who gets appointed to something. And again, I think that the good relationship between Speaker Johnson and Leader Jeffries will be productive for all of us. I think we all should be happy about the fact that they have a good working relationship. And in terms of keeping the trains running on time and preventing government shutdowns and that sort of thing, I am optimistic about those things happening because of that relationship.
When have the trains run on time?
Well, we haven't had a shutdown, which is like a miracle in this era of chaos.
Okay, I'm gonna give you that. Not much else.
I'm hopeful.
Not much else on time, Michael Hardaway. They keep pushing it down the road, Julie and Mariana, raise your hand if you're with me on that one. Okay, I put them on the. Okay, thank you very much, Michael.
You are the resistance. God bless and good luck.
That was Alex Jones earlier today lamenting the sale of his InfoWars platform as part of the $1.4 billion defamation judgment that he owes to family members of victims of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. Pending a bankruptcy court hearing in Houston next week over whether the auction sale was correctly administered, The Onion, as in the onion, as in the excellent and satirical news site, is expected to acquire the InfoWars website and its associated social media accounts, among other assets. The Onion plans to remake InfoWars into a parody of itself, one that mocks weird internet personalities who shamelessly peddle misinformation. As bonus karmic justice, the nonprofit organization Everytown for Gun Safety has partnered with The Onion as the exclusive advertiser on the revamped InfoWars site. Joining me now are Ben Collins, the chief executive of The Onion's parent company, Global Tetrahedron, and John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety. What a day, gentlemen. Thank you for making time.
It's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, what an extraordinary day. First, just can we start with this the court hearing that's happening in Houston? Are you confident that the sale's going to go through?
Yeah, look, we won the auction. We heard from the trustee last night. And, you know, the biggest shock to us would have been if Alex Jones was just like, oh, yeah, absolutely, they won the auction. Let's move right along.
Yeah.
So, like, we're not surprised by this development, but we won. We're excited to take over this thing.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are excited for you to take. Did you hear any response from Alex Jones's camp? Do you know how it landed when he was informed that it was The Onion with the exclusive advertisements from Everytown for Gun Safety?
Yeah, I think what's hilarious is that he kind of, from what we can tell, I'm not sure he knew what it was.
The Onion?
Yeah, I'm not sure he knew what The Onion. He lives in a completely siloed reality.
A completely humorless reality.
He's like the newspaper, The Onion. And we were like, yeah, correct. It is we do have a newspaper. You should all go get it, by the way. But I don't think he knew exactly what it was, and that was very funny to see. He also read a statement from our CEO, Bryce Tetrader, who may or may not exist.
Yes, it's a very hilarious statement.
Yeah, so, it's nice for him to get some of his own medicine in a lot of ways today.
Yeah. Can you explain, John, what it means for Everytown to be the exclusive advertiser here?
Yeah, and look, some people think it's odd bedfellows for The Onion and Everytown to be together. We think just the opposite. At our fingertips, we've got all the data, we've got the stories, we've got the research. But what they've got is the creativity to really break through. And in many ways, we think humor is a way to reach audiences we've never reached before and to reach them in a way with a new medium. And that is really satire and humor.
Yeah, I would imagine. First of all, I think that's such an astute observation, the power of humor. And I think in many ways, the right uses humor often wickedly to its own advantage. But the left hasn't been able to do it. And this sort of like karmic justice is also insanely funny, right?
Yeah, it is.
What was the reaction from the parents who had their children massacred at Newtown, right, who've suffered through so much? They get this major settlement with Alex Jones, and now this turn of the screw. Can you talk a little bit
John
about that?
talked to them specifically today, but I do want to say, they made this happen.
The parents.
They deferred some money to make this happen for us within this case. And, I want to say...
Some of their settlement money was used towards this purchase.
Because they thought also this would be funny. The big cruel joke about Alex Jones is that he takes all of these people and turns them into characters in his world. The San Diego families are characters that everybody involved in this case are soulless monsters and all this stuff. They are victims of the worst thing that can happen. But they're also human beings.
Yeah.
And they also like a joke.
Yeah.
They want something nice to happen. And, thankfully today, I think a lot of people opened their phone for the first time and saw something that didn't make them want to, run off into the woods and live in the wilderness. Exactly. They saw something really genuinely good. And that's the feeling they wanted to give to people, I think.
And the thing is, you have to acknowledge the courage of these families for years standing up to Alex Jones. And they know that the impact of this is bigger than just them. They know that this is going to have an impact on victims all over this country. And certainly Everytown is very concerned about those families. We came into really being after Sandy Hook, but they know that their courage is going to make a difference to families all over this country.
Well, and I think in the bigger picture, even setting aside the horror of gun violence, it's that Alex Jones, his InfoWars site ends up being a charade, just like he's a charade, Yes. I think that there is real justice in that. I do have to ask, in terms of how this idea came about, Ben, I think it was you replied to a joke on Blue Sky, which is an alternative to X, saying that you were looking into buying InfoWars. Is that the seed? Looking into it.
Yeah, I quoted a famous guy there when I said that. Look, that's really how we found out about it like everybody else did. We read on the news that it was for sale, and I think everybody in the room was like, wouldn't it be funny if we bought InfoWars? And then everyone was like, wait, but wouldn't it actually be funny if we bought InfoWars? So we had just bought The Onion 9 months ago. So we had kind of known how to buy stuff at this point. And we just started calling around. We called the family's lawyers. We're like, how does this actually happen?
Why did you think of the families? Just because they were so already involved in this?
Yeah, and I also just knew them from my previous life at this place.
Right.
So I called them and I was like, what's the deal here? What do you think it might take, and how do we actually make this work? And and then a few months later, we were simultaneously building up this roster of Onion writer Hall of Famers, the best comedy writers in America, and we're just NDAing them and being like, what would you do if we bought this thing? And at that point, we were like, if we don't get this thing, I think we're going to be pretty upset about it because we have this very expansive, cool new world to build on this this horrible website we're about to pave over. So we're very excited to show it off to people, and that's basically they made it happen. The families made it happen. Everytown made it happen. By partnering with us in this, we're just really excited about the future.
What's the advertising going to look like? You guys have free reign here.
It's going to be from banner ads to creating content together to videos.
Are you going to sell supplements?
It's on the table, but we haven't decided yet.
Speaking of supplements, this is from the statement that was released by The Onion today about Alex Jones's supplement business. We plan to collect... Let me say this straight. We plan to collect the entire stock of the InfoWars warehouses of supplements into a large vat and boil down the contents into a single candy bar-sized omnivitamin that one executive, I will not name names, may eat in order to increase his power and perhaps become immortal. Can you expand on that? What actually happens to the supplements?
Well, we do know that we have them now, and we have to find out.
That's insane.
It is crazy. I have no idea what to do with tens of thousands, probably, of bottles of Brain Force Plus, but we're about to find out together. Maybe we will melt it down into one omnivitamin. If you want a bite, please.
Definitely.
Come down to Texas.
I want to see if you could melt it down. If you could melt down all of Alex Jones's vitamin supplements into one omnivitamin.
You might get one full supplement.
I mean, something might actually happen to you.
Yeah, but, Alex, I do think that in many ways humor is the way to battle disinformation and disarm them. But we always have to remember the one thing that isn't funny is the pain that Alex Jones visited on the Sandy Hook families. Nothing funny about that.
There is nothing funny about that. And that's why I think it's so meaningful that whenever people are on this site, there's going to be a constant reminder in the advertisements, and I'm sure you'll get creative with them, that this is the reason that this site is this way, right? And it's a constant reminder of the horror that Alex Jones inflicted upon these families in a moment of absolute devastation.
And people shouldn't forget that.
I think it's extraordinary that with that as the predicate, that you can try and find some joy and a next chapter in all of it too, right? And that's the sense of relief.
And that's what we are doing. We are turning the chapter. And we're turning the chapter on the strength of their talent and the courage of the Sandy Hook families.
Yeah, well, it's an extraordinary story about the families.
Yes, without a doubt.
Ben, I look forward to the documentary about all of this, especially the fabrication of the omnivitamin.
Yes,
hopefully a Times Square kind of event.
Yeah,
the naked cowboy can be there.
Yeah, of course. Look, it's going to be a scary time for the people we tested omnivitamin on, but everybody else is going to be a good time.
It's going to be a good time. One of the bright spots in an otherwise pretty dark moment for all of us. It is great to see you guys. Congratulations. Good luck with the road ahead. We will be reading voraciously when the time is right. Ben Collins and John Feinblatt, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
It should be called the Biden Tunnel. It is the most complex infrastructure project funded by Joe Biden. It will provide a third tunnel across the Hudson River between New York City and New Jersey, one of the most important interstate links in the country. As the vehicular traffic has increased across the Hudson River over the last 50 years, there has not been one additional lane added to that crossing. New York Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, for 24 years in the Senate, was a champion of a tunnel that never got built. So were some New York governors, New York City mayors. No one could get it done. No one. Then came Joe Biden. Construction began this year on the new tunnel. For the next 100 years, people will be driving through that tunnel and they will have no idea who did that. They should call it the Biden Tunnel. Secretary Pete Buttigieg is back with us, and Donald Trump is going to take credit for that tunnel.
Absolutely. I mean, look, we've created a pipeline of good projects that are going to play out over the next few years. When I called projects like the Hudson River Tunnel the cathedrals of our infrastructure, I didn't say that just because it's a poetic word for something big. I said it bearing in mind that the thing about the world's great cathedrals is the hands that laid the cornerstone of those cathedrals weren't even around 100 years later when other hands laid the keystone. And while some of the projects we're funding, like a streetscape project to make an intersection safer, really can be done in 1 or 2 construction seasons, others, even working at warp speed, are the work of a decade or more. But President Biden deserves the credit for making these things happen because so many others before him promised and failed to get it done. I'll admit, one of the few times that I was fooled by Donald Trump was when I was a mayor and he said he was going to do a big infrastructure package. I thought, why not? It's good politics. Both parties would like to see it happen. Why wouldn't he do that? And plus, it seems to be something he talks about all the time. Of course, they didn't. But Joe Biden did. And it was an amazing thing to watch, especially because the bipartisan nature of that deal really specifically vindicated his model of how to get things done in this town at a time when people said, That's just not how it works anymore. And what's resulted is even more things that people said were impossible have happened. Of course, they said it was politically impossible to do this. But another thing that they told me growing up was impossible was for union jobs and manufacturing jobs to come back to the industrial Midwest in places like where I grew up. They told us that was all done. Never
we
again.
didn't even think that that was governmental action. We just thought, well, private enterprise does a factory here, or they don't, or they move a factory. The idea that government could get in here and influence what private industry is doing was something that people weren't even really thinking about before this presidency in any serious way.
You weren't allowed to use terms like industrial strategy. And yet the results of the industrial strategy are that factories are rising out of the prairie in places like northern Indiana, where I grew up, and Michigan, where I live now, and Kentucky and Kansas, where I've visited facilities that would not be happening if it weren't for things like the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS and Science Act and the infrastructure.
Can I just stop you on that point for a moment, just because of the politics of it, because we're trying to teach both what's been done here and the political implications. When you say rising out of the prairie, somewhere in what I've been reading about this, it indicated something like 80% of the benefits of that kind of activity are happening out there in the Republican prairie, where, by the way, there's room. There's plenty of room to throw up a new factory. It isn't easy to throw up a new factory in Los Angeles County. There's not a lot of room. But out there, there's plenty, and that is where it's happening.
That's right.
And you're not going to get any political credit for that.
Well, right now, people in the building trades in some of these communities are telling me they're having the biggest year they've ever had just building these factories. But yeah, they're not even online yet. Actually, most of these major factories and facilities are slated to come online in 2026, some in 25, many in 2027. So I think we're going to have a responsibility, and I certainly, whatever I might be doing by way of a day job, I will be reminding everybody who will listen, and quite a few people who maybe won't, that these things are happening because Joe Biden made sure that American manufacturing
will have a seat here anytime you want it to remind people of this.
Dr. Patel, I was going to you first. Your reaction to RFK Jr. as Donald Trump's pick for HHS secretary, what does it mean?
Shock and awe. I mean, those are probably no truer words spoken, because it's still unbelievable. It feels, Stephanie, like I'm watching some movie that is just playing on the outside and it's fiction and I'll wake up, but it's real. And it's something that I think can affect every American, whether you think it can or not. It's just such a critical role in healthcare and public health. And the idea that this person is now going to be kind of the ambassador to the world for all of our health issues is troubling.
Charlotte, this is a huge department. I want people to understand he is going to be in charge of a nearly $2 trillion budget. He doesn't actually have a background in medicine. He's an environmental attorney. How is this going to work out?
So I think the thing that I'm going to be watching for is less how he actually manages this department and more what his sort of history of espousing these conspiracy theories means for public trust in our nation's health establishment.
And we already have a trust issue.
Right. And I think that trust issue started during COVID, and there's, sort of a lot of polarization of basic health facts. And I think that's just going to continue. And I think that's going to have serious public health implications for everybody in this country.
Dr. Patel, can you just explain for us everything that HHS does? What are all the things that fall under its umbrella?
Yeah, 11 agencies of incredible significance, everything from the Centers for Disease Control, so chronic disease surveillance and monitoring, and all the public health emergency activities that the CDC does. Along with that, the Food and Drug Administration, that's the direct target, I think, for RFK's comments and what the president-elect reiterated today. But a lot of people forget Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Steph, that's CMS, that is the largest kind of public insurer alongside the Veterans Program. So that's a big agency. And then on top of that, the National Institutes of Health, the Public Health Service, the Medical Reserve Corps, the Surgeon General's Office, the list goes on. The HHS secretary has incredible authority to declare public health emergencies. They can lift restrictions on drugs. They can put in restrictions on drugs. They can override decisions from advisory committees. So this is really a key role. And the only thing I can hope for, is that Senate confirmation will be tricky and that it'll be very hard to put him in this role.
Well, the person who might know a bit about that is McKay. Take us inside the Hill. What are you hearing from Republicans about this pick?
Yeah, I was actually just texting before we went on air here with a senior Republican who has spent a lot of time on the Hill. And I asked him, so far, just kind of as a gut check, are these picks that Trump's made better, worse, or about the same as what you expected? And he said, there's this weird dynamic right now among Republicans on the Hill, which is that even the kind of old guard Republicans, the ones who are more Trump averse, Trump skeptical, have been so exhausted and are so kind of afraid of voicing any discontent or dissent that there's really just no appetite for opposition to Trump. He said, I'll be honest, the picks are worse than I thought they would be, but I'm kind of suffering in solitude here. At least that's how this one source feels. And I do get the sense that while there is, certainly an amount of alarm about these picks, RFK, Matt Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard, I'm just not sure how much appetite there is for real opposition after Trump just won pretty decisively this last election.
All right, well, Peter, you get to pat yourself on the back because it was less than a week ago you were sitting right next to me and you predicted two of the first picks would be RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. What are your thoughts on that now?
Well, you were looking for a gesture to see if Trump might be bipartisan by putting a Democrat in his cabinet the way George W. Bush put a Democrat in his cabinet, the way Barack Obama put a Republican in his cabinet, and so on and so forth. But these are not obviously Democrats that the rest of the Democratic Party actually embraces. They're not really mainstream Democrats by any stretch. RFK Jr., obviously, as you've outlined pretty extensively, is a pretty marginal figure in his party with non-mainstream views of medical science. Tulsi Gabbard has espoused arguments that the Russians made when it comes to Ukraine. In fact, the Russians are so enamored of her that she was famously called on Russian state television our girlfriend, somebody who has, met with the Syrian dictator, somebody who has been outside of the mainstream of American foreign policy, but maybe in the mainstream of Donald Trump's cabinet. So I think that, what you're seeing is in some ways a new president coming in who's testing the boundaries. He's trying to see, okay, how far can I go? Will you actually stop me to these Senate Republicans? To McKay's point, they may not. They may, in fact, defer to him because he did win the election and he is their president. But in a normal Senate, in a normal time, the names we've just talked about, none of them would have been confirmable. The idea that you would have somebody investigated for child sex trafficking be in charge of the Justice Department, unthinkable. This is a different time.
McKay, the conversation Peter is talking about, the two and I were talking just on Friday night. Could this be Donald Trump's moment? Because it wasn't just a MAGA win. The majority of Americans said we've moved to the right. Could this be a moment where he moves to the center? But the Bulwark is reporting that Trump actually wants this fight. He really wants Gaetz in a position to, investigate the investigators and MAGAfy the DOJ. Even if he doesn't get it, can we officially put to bed this idea that Donald Trump, that this talk that Donald Trump is moving to the center? Because I can tell you, every person that I talked to in the Mar-a-Lago set in the last week keeps saying to me, oh, just wait, Stephanie, he's going to be governing for all. But with these picks, I don't know.
I feel like we've been talking about the future Trump pivot to the center for 9 years now, and it's never happened. And I think we need to wake up to that. Anyone who's still waiting for it, I do think the Gaetz pick is worth just dwelling on for 1 second, because to the point you were just making about what the Bulwark said, set aside all the allegations and the investigations around Matt Gaetz. It's worth remembering that he is grossly unqualified for the job. I mean, he has no prosecutorial experience, astonishingly little experience as an attorney at all. He would, by most metrics, be the most inexperienced person to hold that job, certainly in the modern era. So what is his credential? It's his absolute willingness to obey Trump, unburdened by any idea of what the Justice Department is supposed to be or how it's supposed to behave. And when I was reporting a year ago on names that were being circulated for DOJ, I was hearing people like Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Jeffrey Clark. And I remember some kind of more old guard Republican sources telling me, no, that's kind of a liberal fever dream. Those people are far too unserious unserious and extreme, Trump would never name them. Matt Gaetz is far more unserious, far more extreme, far more unqualified than any of those people. And so we have to be pretty clear-eyed about why Trump would pick him, and it's to be his enforcer. It's to be the person he can use to weaponize the DOJ, as he has alluded to throughout this past campaign.
Or potentially to help him avoid this House Ethics Committee and this report, Charlotte. What do we know about this meeting being canceled? Because whether or not he's a current congressperson or up to be the attorney general, I think the American people would want to know what's in that report.
I would be very surprised if we don't hear more from what's in this report soon. I mean, already there are senators sniffing around it. Already, I would assume it's probably being leaked if it hasn't been already. And I would be really surprised if that stays totally in the dark throughout these confirmation hearings.
For a little parable for our age, and I'm going to use sports for a minute here, so indulge me. I promise I'm going somewhere with it. So this week on Sunday Night Football, Detroit Lions quarterback Jared Goff, generally a very good quarterback, was having a terrible game against the Houston Texans. Goff threw 4 interceptions by halftime, meaning he threw the ball, the other team caught it, taking possession. That's bad. It's a turnover. You don't want to do it. At halftime, someone posted a surprising statistic to social media, and it started going viral. Here it is. This is now Jared Goff's 7th career game with at least 4 interceptions. His record in those games, 6-0. Now, for those of you who don't follow football, that is an extremely shocking, improbable, indeed, it turns out, ridiculous claim. 4 interceptions a game is exceedingly rare. Winning 6 games where you did it? Okay. But it just kept circulating. The original poster even shared what appeared to be a graphic from a well-known sports statistic website to back it up. That looks like StatMuse. And that was apparently enough for folks to just parrot the claim unchallenged. It went everywhere. Even people who should know better, like ESPN host Pat McAfee and Aaron Rodgers, the conspiracy theorist quarterback for the New York Jets, who RFK Jr. apparently wanted at one point as his running mate.
I love Jared. I'm sure he'll bounce back. And the amazing stat, though, is this a true stat that he's done 4 more picks 7 times and he's won every single one of those games? Is that real?
Yep, 7-0.
That's wild. I mean, that's why stats are for what Big Mike used to say, age?
Stats for losers.
They're for losers. Is this true? It's true. You can probably tell where I'm going with this. The statistic is not true. It was a total lie. Just take it from the guy who made it up in the first place. Quoting, "If you've ever wondered how easy it is to spread fake information, I made this stat up while laying in my bed at halftime of the game." And this random Twitter football guy actually makes a pretty great point there. Now, thankfully, this is a totally harmless prank example of disinformation. Doesn't matter. The only consequence was McAfee getting embarrassed and having to walk it back on air. But what happened in that exchange between Pat McAfee and do your own research, Aaron Rodgers, is kind of the entire story of our age, of our information environment right now. These are the guys, those kinds of guys that are doing the vetting of what's true and not in our current information environment. That's it. Those are the guardrails. They are doing their own research, if you will. And it's not just sports. This problem translates across our political culture. I mean, everything. Lies and misinformation and intentional slander about immigration and immigrants and the economy. They're spreading on this kind of terrain where the anti-vax quarterback just parrots an unvetted statistic he saw on Elon Musk's website to millions of people on ESPN. I saw this stat. Yeah, it's true. That's it. That's the whole problem in miniature. A miniature version of the enormous problem that we all face that has gotten us to this point that the rest of us gotta try to find some way to solve. And I will be the first to say we do our part here, but I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. But boy, oh boy, are we going to have to come up with some.